Hi, my name is Marcus Enninkel. Together with Molly Brown, I wrote this paper named People-Centered Climate Hazard Impact Assessment Using Machine Learning, a Drought Risk Perspective. You might know that the granularity of satellite-derived information is increasing both spatially and temporally. So in other words, we're not only generating several terabytes of data per day per satellite, but we're also able to provide information about the Earth's climate by geostationary satellites, for instance, every 10 minutes. In parallel, the impact of a climate event can be very heterogeneous, not only at community level, but particularly at household level. So ultimately, what we want to understand from a research perspective, but also from an operational humanitarian perspective is not only what will happen with regards to climate hazards, but what will happen to a particular vulnerable community. In any case, the prediction of patterns between climate shocks and related impacts requires some kind of socioeconomic baseline, and that's exactly the problem. This baseline currently doesn't exist. So why not rely on vulnerable communities themselves as data suppliers? Shouldn't they know best? Complex impacts. Already in 2019, we knew that the number of people affected by malnutrition was rising again after several years of decline. COVID-19, the current pandemic, might push another 130 million to the brink of starvation. Until the end of the year, that would mean doubling the number to 260 million. Molly did some very interesting work with regards to weather and climate and socioeconomic long-term impacts, for instance, looking at the relationship between climate conditions during childhood or during birth and socioeconomic variables several decades later in life. I come from the perspective of disaster risk financing, impact-based forecasting, or index-based insurance. And also there, we definitely need to have a clear understanding of robust climate impact pathways, not only historically to calibrate our models, but also for current conditions, because otherwise we automatically increase basis risk, meaning the mismatch between payouts and the needs in the field. Disaster databases are a tricky topic. First of all, there is no commonly accepted data collection standard for socioeconomic data. There are more than 50 different operational drought indices. There's no commonly accepted definition of drought. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that if you look at public databases like the emergency database or Desinventar, you will find large differences in damage estimates. And these differences are even larger when you look at drought-related casualties, because drought usually kills indirectly. So people don't die from drought, quote unquote drought, unless there is a full-blown famine. They usually die from an indirect cause such as dehydration or a health issue. I strongly believe that we need to think far beyond impact data when it comes to disaster risk management, but also disaster risk financing. We need to understand if the crop that we are modeling is actually the crop that is planted in the field. We actually need to know if it's exactly the same crop variety that we're modeling. We need to understand if the start of the season that we are using to initialize our model is actually corresponding to the actual start of season in the field, or if farmers have actually adapted to a very hostile climate and started to distribute their planting. Mobile technologies. If you look at the number of unique mobile subscriptions in Africa, we will expect more than 600 million of them by 2025. But already now, the number of mobile subscriptions compared to total population exceeds more than 50% in the worst connected region on this planet, which is Central Africa. So that's already there. We're far above 50%. In any case, data collection must not be event-driven. If we always collect data when there's something to report, then we are automatically introducing a bias. So we definitely need information as granular as possible, even if there is nothing to report, because otherwise it will be pretty hard to calculate anomalies without a baseline. In addition, we need to establish not only feedback loops between analysts and data suppliers from communities at risk, we need to establish transparent feedback loops, because otherwise there is simply no incentive for data suppliers to continue providing information, because they simply don't understand what's happening with the data that they are providing. Talking about incentives, there are some very interesting strategies to incentivize truthful reporting, or in other words, to limit the risk of strategic reporting. And we've seen different success stories. For instance, in India or in different African countries, we've seen that the communication of agricultural information can not only boost yields, it can increase the efficiency of fertilizer usage. Machine learning and AI. Of course, there is no humanitarian or development equivalent to Google, Amazon, or Facebook. So just for 1 second, let us assume we had a robust socioeconomic gap-filled, smoothed database, and we could not only recognize but also predict patterns. There are several questions that we would have to ask ourselves. First of all, what would we call a satisfactory predictive skill? Would researchers define this satisfactory predictive skill completely different than people in the field and actual operational decision makers? How would we actually communicate probabilistic information that might be a type of information that decision makers in the field are not familiar with? Would we completely cut out local experts, or would we try to aim for some kind of hybrid model that links the qualitative information with the quantitative information with the model output? And what about not only analytical black boxes, but perceived analytical black boxes, meaning analytical methods that are per se not black boxes because they're well documented, but they're perceived as such simply because the complexity of the model output does not match the technical capacity of the end user. Conclusions and next steps. First of all, I think that we really need to move towards a more synchronized data collection and data analysis when we talk about climate hazard information, vulnerability information, socioeconomic impact information. These are all elements of the same narrative, but they seem completely decoupled at the moment. We need to start establishing an archive of socioeconomic data for different purposes, also for the purpose of training more sophisticated models. But in any case, the deployment of an AI model requires so much more than just the development of the model itself from a user perspective. So definitely the key to making things work is technical capacity building. We tried in our paper to outline how an operational workflow could look like. I'm more than happy to tell you all about it, but not in the next 15 seconds. Thanks a lot.